Yeah, g'day YouTubers, Tinker O'Toole again here with another video. Today we're going to talk about attack angles, how important that is and the relevance that is to chainsaw chain for cutting efficiency. What we've got here, we've got a number of chains, but this is the oldest chain that I've got. It's come to the end of its life. It was a Stihl RS full chisel chain. And if you have a look, the digital angle gauge, you can see it leaning on an angle going from the highest point on the left to the lowest point on the right. So the tooth is on the left and the raker's on the right, and it's tipping down at an angle of 6.4 degrees. 6.3 degrees is probably the most sort of aggressive angle that you want, so 6.4 is just going a little bit over that. That's okay. If you've got a powerful saw, like an example is, say you've got an MS660 and you only got a 20-inch bar on, if you've got an attack angle of 6.4 degrees, wow, that's really going to cut fantastic. So how do you get that attack angle? It's the relationship between the highest point of the tooth and the highest point of the raker. That, and when you put the digital angle gauge over the top of that, that's what you get. So underneath, I've got a picture, I've taken a picture underneath, and we'll put a slide up there, and you can see on the left-hand side, you can see the tooth, and on the right-hand side, you can see the raker. And it's 6.4 degrees. So it sits on there. So I made this jig up so that I could measure attack angles. And it's just interesting. It's an interesting subject. It's not for everybody. But if you've got the basic understanding of what an attack angle is and what you should be aiming for and how you can achieve that with your raker gauge or different types of raker gauges, it'll be interesting, because I can tell you straight away that when you pull a chain out of the box, the attack angles on a lot of chains are absolutely terrible. If you've got a brand new chain, I've even heard people say that they resharpen them. One thing that I would advise you to do, that if you've got a brand new chain, check it with a Raker Gauge tool, please, because some of the results that I'm going to show you, you'll think, oh, wow. So anyway, we'll get on to that next part. Okay, so when you use a digital angle gauge, you can get all different type of angles. Depends on when you take the angle gauge out, and we'll see if we can zoom in there, that it's going to sit on the tooth. So we zoom in there very close. You can see that we've got the tooth sitting there. There's the raker, and you can see how much that's filed down. This little spring-loaded foot holds this in the position as best as possible. You can get a slight, little tiny errors. One of the reasons is all your linkages will be all worn. This chain has got quite a lot of play in it. It's stretched quite a lot, so you can get some small errors. But generally, it works pretty good, and you just need to try it a few times and balance it. Look at that, 6.4 degrees, 6.3. So you just got to get used to using it. And as I said, expect a little bit of error. So that's why you need to do it more than once. Okay, so attack angles are used in woodwork. They're used on a metal lathe. They're used on a lot of things. But on a chainsaw, attack angle, it's not something that we talk about a lot. You won't even find much information on it. But if we're talking about a raker gauge and the depth, then if we just sit at tooth and run it along the timber at 0 degree attack angle, nothing happens. It'll just slide all day long. But as we lower the tooth and tilt it to roughly about 6.5 degrees, it starts to bite into the timber, and I'm struggling pushing it. So there it is there. It's just, look, it's taken a little bit out, a bit of timber there. Oh. See if we can zoom in. So look, so that's what it's done, and that's your attack angle. That's pretty much the easiest way to explain it. So the relationship between the height here and the height here, right? On a standard brand new chain, it should be around 0.65 of a millimetre for a 3/8 chain, but in a lot of cases it's well below that. They're stamped out by the millions at the factory, and I guess they may do that deliberately because they don't want to make it the raker depth too deep. But as we file the chain away, this distance between here and here increases double. So as this distance increases double, we need to make the depth a lot deeper so that it maintains that attack angle. I hope you can understand that if this distance here increases right back to the witness mark, the leverage, the pivot point, where it moves up and down, the tooth has less influence in biting in when we're right down here, because this has to move more than double the amount for this to bite in. And that's exactly what happens with the progressive depth gauge. And we've got a picture of it. We'll just put it up there. I've measured 1.35 millimeter gap on this chain that's here now. 1.35 millimeter gap between the highest point of the tooth and the highest point of the raker, and you vary between 6.3 to 6.5 attack angle. So that's all attack angle is. That's all I'm saying it is. I'm not saying that you have to have your chain at an attack angle of 6.3, but what I am saying that 6.3, if you look at an attack angle at 6.3, you'll generally have a raker gauge depth on this worn out chain at end of life at 1.3 millimeters in gap. If this end of life chain was used with a normal raker gauge, which is 0.65 of a millimeter, your attack angle might be 3. An attack angle of 3 is not going to cut wood as good. Now, someone mentioned in real live conditions, things can be different from theory. I've always found out, now this chain will cut better than a brand new one because there's no metal left. The chip clearance is improved. I can tell you what works for me, right? So I'm not going to say what works for you or what works for someone else. You've got your opinion, I've got my opinion. I'm only saying that what I have found out that works for me. And I can tell you right now that this chain, and if we zoom in and have a good look at it, there's nothing much left of it. When you look at the teeth, there they are there. That's used right down to the witness mark. Now, as I said, that's got an attack angle of 6.2 to 6.5. There's a variation there. You can see where the raker, if you have a look there, you can see how lower that is. That works. That will cut better than a brand new chain, guaranteed. Guaranteed, because of the chip clearance, the size of the tooth, it'll just work magnificent. Really will. So what we will go on to is the chains that I tested and the information that I found out. And we'll put a slide up of every chain so that you can see that. So on the Stihl Hexa, we'll put a slide up there. And the attack angle, I just measured it, it was 4.2 to 4.4. So what do you think the depth of the raker was? The depth of the raker was 0.53 millimeters. So just over half a millimeter, far short of the 0.65. Had it have been the 0.65, it would probably have an attack angle of about 5.2. So attack angle has definitely got a relationship with the raker depth. And the raker depth, the deeper you go, the more aggressive it will cut, especially if you've got a very powerful saw and you've got a 20-inch bar on it as opposed to a 36-inch bar. So if you've got an MS660 and you've got a 20-inch bar on it, you can have your rakers a little bit deeper than standard, and it will cut. Maybe a little bit jumpy, but it'll really cut well. So that was on the Hexa. Husqvarna's X-Cut. Put a slide up there. Well, the attack angle was pathetic, 1.5 to 2. Now this chain is not going to cut very good because I measured a raker depth gauge of 0.41 millimeters. That is pathetic. So you really need to, these are straight out of the box, brand new, never been used. So that was really bad. The next one, we'll put a slide up of that, was the Hurricane chain, full chisel. which is almost identical to the RS. 0.54 millimeter gap, so it's not that much better than the standard still. So the Hurricane had an attack angle of 3.4 degrees. This is straight out of the box and tested. And this is why, even if you use this type of gauge on a brand new chain at 0.65 of a millimeter, you'll improve your attack angle. It's not going to be 6.5 like this, but it's going to be around 5, give or take, something like that. So all as I'm saying that I can use attack angle based on the depth of the raker. So if I was to put this like there, 6.5 on this old worn out chain, I know through experience that if you zoom in and have a look, I know that it's going to be that deep. It has to be that deep on the raker for it to have an attack angle of 6.5. And it's 1.35 millimeters. That's the depth. So the other thing that's interesting, and I can show you a picture of my measuring device that I use to measure the heights. And it's a digital caliper. So it measures 1/100th of a millimeter. Yeah, sure, I've got a dial gauge, but 1/100th of a millimeter, that's good enough for me. So that's what that does. So what I actually do is use I zero the caliper and sit it on the highest point of the tooth. Now in the next picture, it shows the raker, and I do exactly the same. Because I zeroed it on the highest point of the tooth, and it's going to be lower, it will show me a minus, and I'll get the figure of the depth. So I'll know what the raker depth is. So I can check this out on a chain that's half worn out, quarter worn out, fully worn out. I can find out what the raker height is. And then knowing the raker height depth, I'll know what the attack angle should be. Now, for those people that are not confident enough or really don't understand or maybe not believe that attack angle is relevant, it's relevant to everything that you use in woodwork or metal. And it's like the axemen at the competitions when you see them at the still wood sports. The guy standing on the log and they go axeman, 3, 2, 1, and they start chopping. Well, what angle are they chopping at? What's the attack angle? It's 45 degrees. 45 degree attack angle has proven that it cuts through the wood better. So what I'm telling you is anything from about 5.5 up to 6.5, somewhere in between that. If you've got an attack angle between 5.5 and 6.5, it's going to cut good because you've reduced your raker height depth. And a progressive depth gauge is superior in doing that than the constant depth gauge. That's all I'm claiming, right? And I'm just giving you a few figures of what I found the attack angle is. Now, we can even go one step further than that for those that may be interested. And on the laptop, what we've actually got here is a Raker Gauge software where you can make your own. And it's a calculator. So you've got the different parts of the chain. Here we've got the tooth, and you put in the parameters. So you look at here, you've got A, B, C, and you've got all the parameters here. Then you go to the calculator and you punch them all in, and what you can do after that, it shows you the different type of gauge types. So this is gauge type 1. You can see the little slots that are here, the slots there, and this is the slot that rests on the tie straps. Or you can make gauge type 2 that just has one big slot. So with the calculator, you can also put in your Raker Gauge depth, right? And you can put in your angle. So you can put in your angle there and the raker, the distance between, when you go to the information chart there, you put in the difference, you put the raker height difference in there. You also put the distance from the tooth to the raker, and you also put the height at the top of the tie strap. So you've got, and also you measure in the middle of the tie strap when you're using gauge 2. So you've got gauge 1 and gauge 2 here. And then you go to the calculator and you put all that information in there, and you can make your own, which I've done here. So they're all my different Raker gauge tools. They look like a little Lego man, don't they? So it's probably, you know, something that's certainly not for the average person. And one thing that I always like is a powerful saw and the sharpest chain that you can get. And I generally like using full chisel. I don't like square ground because it takes too much time and I'm not an expert at it. So, yeah, when I'm using a reasonably powerful chainsaw, 70 cc's to 80 cc's, that's what I like to use. Don't like to use anything bigger, it becomes too heavy. Having my chain as sharp as possible with least vibration. That's the other thing, that if you go too deep on the rakers, it can be too jumpy. It can be dangerous when you go too deep. Kickback's even worse. So I never ever take it into the danger zone, if I could use that word. And because I spent many hours using this digital angle gauge, spent many hours playing around with this type of gauge, spent many hours designing all my own different gauges, spent many hours cutting timber and using a stopwatch on it to find out which cut better, which chain worked better. And my end conclusion was that this is the best gauge, beats Husqvarna, beats just about everything on the market. And that's all I'm saying. I'm just saying that this will give you a fairly constant attack angle from brand new to the end of life. And if you buy a brand new chain out of the box, check it with your Raker gauge, because I'll guarantee you that you can take a little bit off it. I hope that information helps some people. This type of information about attack angles and everything like that, they're progressive Raker gauges. You've got to go back to Ray Carlton, who invented it back in 1965. So we're talking a long time. We're talking well over 50 years. I'll give you 2 more examples of an attack angle. So here we have 0 degrees here. Here we have about 45-degree angle that the blade comes in. So that's an example of an attack angle. We have another example of a spoke shave. Again, blade coming in at about a 45-degree angle. So on a chainsaw, the end conclusion is that the raker height exists, and therefore an attack angle will exist. One can't exist without the other. As we increase the depth of the raker, so as we increase the depth, which means make this shorter, this angle will get steeper. A brand new chain roughly has an attack angle anywhere from about 4.5, right? It should be really round about 5 and a bit. What I was quoting at 6.3 is that my research has shown that when a chain gets to the end of the life using the still progressive depth gauge, I end up with about 6.3. So it actually gets, the attack angle gets greater. That's what I've found out using that gauge from a brand new chain to end of life. I'm only using attack angle because I can, rather than using the depth of the raker. I can use the depth of the raker and illustrate that and say, hey, look at the difference between here and here. But when it's all said and done, That is the attack angle. When it comes in that position, bites in that is attack angle. So if we use a piece of timber again, when your chainsaw tooth comes in, it is hitting the timber like that. It digs in, right? It digs in. And the sharper it is, the better that it digs in. And it'll take a better bite. As it gets blunt, it tends to want to skate off the timber. So attack angle is very, very relevant. It's just something that most people don't talk about. And how many people ever use that word when they're cutting a tree down? Well, what's the attack angle? Nobody ever does. You either cut with the grain or you cut against the grain. So, yeah. But attack angle is relevant. So I hope that information helps. It's maybe something to think about. It'll appeal to some people, and to other people they couldn't give two hoots. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.